All right, the U.S. has resumed sending military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine after Kyiv said it was ready to accept a 30-day ceasefire with Russia, following some very high-level face-to-face talks that happened in Saudi Arabia yesterday. Now, the deal will now be presented to Moscow, but it's unclear if the Kremlin will agree to some of those terms.
We're going to bring it to them directly. We're going to say that Ukraine is prepared to stop all battlefield activity and begin the immediate process of negotiating an enduring end to the war. And we'll see what their response is. If their response is yes, then we know we've made real progress and there's a real chance of peace. If their response is no, it would be highly unfortunate and it would make their intentions clear.
So joining us for now on this is CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams, who's joining us from Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Holly, so you've just come from a press conference with President Zelenskyy. What's he saying this morning?
Good morning, Vlad. Well, President Zelenskyy was extremely positive about those talks yesterday in Saudi Arabia with the U.S., reiterating a point made by the U.S. side that the ball is now very much in Russia's court. Zelenskyy suggested that if Russia doesn't agree to a 30-day ceasefire, then the U.S. could take powerful steps. Now, this is no doubt a confusing, even dizzying time in American diplomacy. Remember, it was just 12 days ago when we saw that contentious, explosive meeting between President Zelenskyy and President Trump at the White House. Following that, the U.S. suspended the delivery of military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine, seeming to upend America's Ukraine policy. Now, though, the U.S. seems to be back in Ukraine's corner. President Zelenskyy today seemed to suggest that the two sides had hit the reset button. He said the meeting in Saudi Arabia broke down Russia's attempt to escalate things between the U.S. and Ukraine. Now, I asked him about comments he made last week suggesting that President Trump was living in a disinformation space created by Russia, and he had a really interesting response. Zelenskyy said that where there's a lack of communication, there's a void, and it's filled with disinformation. And he said that he wanted Ukraine's American friends to visit this country more and see the reality on the ground. You may remember during that explosive meeting at the White House, Zelenskyy very pointedly asked Vice President J.D. Vance if he had been to Ukraine.
He replied that he'd seen reports on the internet, which I guess is what a vice president does. But I'm curious about the response from the Kremlin, Holly. Because the question, of course, that Zelenskyy has been asking, or the question that he's hoping to have answered, is whether or not there are any security guarantees. Even if this peace holds, the guarantees that Vladimir Putin won't arbitrarily decide to do away with the fragile peace like he did when it came, for example, to the Minsk Accord. So if the idea is that there will be some concessions that Ukraine will have to make, some concessions the Russians will have to make, how sure are we that Vladimir Putin will go for that?
We're not sure at all. I mean, we heard from Russia's presidential spokesman today who said that they are closely studying the statements that came out of that meeting in Saudi Arabia. That is a very cautious response from Russia. President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is expected to travel to Russia later on this week for meetings. Look, we can only speculate about Russia's thinking or Vladimir Putin's thinking at this point. On the one hand, Russia currently holds the momentum on the battlefield, so, he may not want a ceasefire. On the other hand, Russia, like Ukraine, is thought to have taken hundreds of thousands of military casualties during this war. And during 3 years of conflict, Russia has only succeeded in taking about 20% of this country. So if there's a face-saving way out of the conflict, maybe Vladimir Putin wants to take it. Also, maybe Vladimir Putin doesn't want to anger President Trump. We may know more on this in the days to come.
All right, very interesting. Holly Williams reporting from Kyiv this morning for us. Thank you, Holly, as always. We appreciate it. All right, for more insight and analysis, let's bring in Jon Alterman. He is a senior vice president at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's also the director of the Middle East Studies program. I guess the first question, Jonathan, is how did the Saudis become a major player in negotiating these talks between Ukraine and Russia with the United States?
The Saudis want to be big negotiators in general. They want to provide a venue. Every time there's a Saudi flag, I think they see that helping their branding. It also builds relationships between the foreign minister, the rest of the Saudi leadership, and the U.S. government and leaders around the world. They see this as something they can usefully do to mediate the same way, in many ways, that the Chinese helped mediate the Saudi-Iranian agreement a couple of years ago. I think they see it as something that doesn't cost a lot of money, raises their global profile, and helps their national interests.
So the question that I have now is one that Secretary Rubio sort of alluded to. He says that the ball is now in Russia's court. He says that if they don't agree to this ceasefire, they'll know, and I'm paraphrasing here, where the holdup is and who is roadblocking this road to peace. The question then, of course, then is what would that really mean? The United States has, at least with President Trump, has taken a less than severe approach with Vladimir Putin. They've lifted some of the sanctions that were implemented as a result of their illegal incursion into Ukraine. So is that really the way you read it? That if Vladimir Putin doesn't agree to this, then no, now we know he's the guy who's trying to prevent peace from happening.
I think Vladimir Putin is going to say, well, this is interesting. Let's look at it a little more carefully. Let's study it. As your correspondent suggested, there's some momentum on the battlefield. The problem that Zelenskyy has is he feels this urgency because of such a bad visit to Washington that went badly off script, or at least his script. I think Putin doesn't feel any urgency. It feels maybe you can draw this out longer, some ambiguity, thinks ultimately Trump is sympathetic, and also thinks that Trump is going to while he's impatient now, he'll get diverted by something else and that'll take the pressure off Russia. So I think the Russian move will be, okay, Zelenskyy had urgency. He had to do something. Putin doesn't feel urgency. He thinks his patience is going to reward him. And I think what you're going to see is in response to a move by the United States, Russia will try to take its time and explore how much either other things it can trade, other things that the president gets involved with, tariffs, something else, and will be slow, and then see if there's another way to try to prompt urgency in Zelenskyy, which ultimately is the way the Russians think they're going to continue to move up the chain and win concessions from the Ukrainians.
Last question. Do you think that, as you heard Holly Williams reporting, President Zelenskyy in a meeting just this morning that she attended, a press conference that Holly attended, suggested that more lawmakers should come to see what the Ukrainians are up against? And she referenced Vice President Vance in the Oval Office when Zelenskyy offered him to come and visit. He obviously has not visited. He said that he's seen and watched reports. But I wonder, when you have a senator like Mark Kelly, who just came back from Ukraine and saw with his own eyes what the Ukrainians are up against. He was, of course, called a traitor by Elon Musk, who has he's not an elected official at all, calling a decorated veteran, a combat aviator, a traitor for just going to see with his own eyes what is happening, where the money the United States is spending is going. Do you think that more lawmakers should take the same path as Senator Kelly did?
Yeah, I think more lawmakers should try to assess how important Ukraine is. It was very important to the Biden administration, and people were very engaged. I think there is a sense that the Democrats are more engaged, Republicans less engaged. I think Republicans owe it to themselves to be serious. I remember I was in Moscow about 10 years ago, and for the first time, I met a conservative veteran of Republican administrations who was very pro-Russia. This has been a long effort of the Russians to cultivate conservative voices. I think that the Republican Party needs to come to some sort of greater decision about whether Russia is a threat or a potential partner, and how we treat Ukraine and how we treat Russia's actions in Ukraine come from a conclusion on that point. I think for a lot of people, they're concerned with domestic issues, they're concerned with tariffs, they're concerned with other kinds of things. And frankly, what is concerning to me is not so much that people aren't in the right place on Ukraine. I think Ukraine, which to me is an important issue, is not something that enough people have thought through where they stand on. I think it's time for people to be serious about whether this is really a serious national security issue or not. If it is, they should act accordingly.
Yeah, it's such an excellent point, Jonathan, and especially because Vladimir Putin can wait everybody out. He's not going anywhere. He's not held to any kind of electoral cycle. And for him, this is just a waiting game, which is why it's easy to understand why Zelenskyy would want some security guarantees. All right, Jon Alterman, thank you very much for your analysis. Really interesting. Appreciate it.